Hello and welcome. This is Adrian Goldberg here with Byline Radio coming to you live today from the Capitol building in the United States. This is the first full day of my trip to Washington, D.C. for Byline Times. I'm actually sitting by the visitor centre, which is no more than 60, 70 yards from the Capitol building itself. The Capitol building, the home of the US Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and famously, of course, the site of the January the 6th insurrection when Trump supporters refused to accept the legitimacy of Joe Biden's presidency. It is a real wow moment when you see the Capitol building. Tall steps, then a squat, statuesque building, and then on top 3 layers like a wedding cake, and with the figure of freedom on the very top. And this is being described as the most, if not one of the most important US elections of our lifetime. The Democrat Kamala Harris challenging Donald Trump, described by his enemies anyway, as an authoritarian, as a fascist even. His election, on the face of it, will have a much greater, a much more momentous impact on the UK, Europe, and the rest of the world. Trump, of course, no great believer in NATO. What impact would his election have on Ukraine and the Middle East, for example? He's threatening to deport up to 15 million people that he describes as illegals and impose tariffs of 20% on US imports. Harris is reaching out to female voters defending the right to abortion, which has been rowed back on in some states, and she is threatening to legislate on that. I should say, before we join Peter Jukes, that this is a beautiful, balmy morning here in Washington, D.C. Brown leaves blowing in the wind, freakishly warm, just to make you feel jealous if you're listening back in the UK. It's about 25 Celsius now. Very quiet as well. Main tourist season is over. The quiet before the storm, perhaps. Who knows what will be unleashed by the result of the election on November the 5th. And as I say, this is my first day here. If you are listening to this and you've got questions to ask about the US election, we may not be able to answer them immediately, but we will take them away, think about them, and repeat this exercise again over the coming days. So if you've got something you want to ask or a comment you want to make about the US election, just tap the little microphone icon in the bottom left-hand corner of your app, and we'll let you on, let you come and talk to us. And as I say, it may be a question that you've got to raise that we can't answer immediately, though we will do our best. But if we can't, we will take your question away and we'll try and answer it in a forthcoming broadcast. And let's introduce now Peter Jukes from Byline Times, the Byline Times executive editor, co-founder of the Byline Times. Peter, I'm here for Byline Times, and it's very clear from my first impressions that America is gripped by this election. It is hogging, as you might expect, headlines on radio, on television, and it's visible, it's evident. T-shirts, caps being worn to reflect which side or other people are on. What things do you think we can get from being here in DC ahead of the election?
Well, we can get the delight of listening to your beautiful descriptions and Brum poetry, and I can listen all day. It's great to have you there on the ground. Obviously, things are very different, aren't they? What we see online through Musk's social media is slightly different. We see a lot of American TV, but we don't know what it's like on the ground. I'd like to ask you, Adrian, I mean, it feels like the race hasn't moved much in terms of the polls, pretty even. A slight edge for Kamala since she took over the nomination from Biden, who was well behind. But there's been a few developing things the last week. Obviously, I wonder if you're getting a sense there, this strange Madison Square Garden rally with Trump and Musk, and also a comedian who made very disparaging remarks about Puerto Rico, which is a part of America. And then Biden said something, he called it a garbage island, this comedian, and then Biden said something slightly inappropriate about Trump supporters being garbage, and then Donald Trump turns up to his last rally in a garbage truck dressed as a garbage man. All very bizarre. I was very enthused, and so was Hardy, our editor, by Kamala Harris's speech on the Ellipse in DC. Just to explain people, that's part of DC, formal part where Trump spoke on the 6th of January 2021, leading to the insurrection. So it's my turn to interview you, Adrian. Are these last sort of shocking moments of garbage playing out on the ground, or you think people's minds are set?
Well, they're certainly being discussed. And, the garbage thing, the importance of an apostrophe. If only Lynn Truss, and I stress Lynn Truss, not Liz Truss, were here to help us. Do you remember Lynn Truss, the author who wrote Eat, Shoots and Leaves?
And leaves, yes, I do.
Indeed. And that was all about the importance of punctuation. So, as you mentioned, at the Madison Square rally that Trump held, and of course, the Democrats pointed out that Adolf Hitler held a pro-America rally at the same place.
He didn't quite turn up himself, but big Hitler supporters were there, yeah.
Yeah, a pro-Hitler rally, and they were drawing connections between that. And certainly when you heard some of the language that was being used at that rally, I don't think it's a fair fetched comparison, although, of course, the Republicans bristled at it and said that it was in poor taste. But as you say, a comedian, a Trump-supporting comedian, said that there's this garbage floating in the sea. Oh, yeah, that garbage is Puerto Rico. And in a Zoom call then, Biden has a conversation in which he says the garbage is Trump's supporters. Now, is that apostrophe before the S, in which case he's referring to the individual comedian, the Trump supporter, comma, S, or is it Trump supporters?
Brilliant.
Apostrophe.
Do we know?
Well, Biden will say, no, I was just accusing the individual comedian who criticised Puerto Rico as himself being garbage. But of course, this had echoes. I've not seen this particularly picked up, Peter, but Hillary Clinton.
The deplorables. Yes, the deplorables. Yes.
And in fairness, in that case, Hillary Clinton was I think unequivocally referring to Trump supporters. I think it's more nuanced this time as to whether Biden was referring to Trump supporters as garbage. But of course, in an election like this, and particularly given the way in which Trump election is, this was a gift to him. So as you say, Trump turns up wearing a high-vis jacket, looking like a garbage worker in a garbage truck. It's manna from heaven for him. And I was listening to some late night or early morning conservative radio this morning, and of course this is what they're playing on. They're having great fun with this. It's an interesting thing, this notion of talk show shock jockery, as we used to call it in the UK, Peter. I'm not sure that anybody whose mind isn't made up will be listening to those stations, but they're there, they're powerful, and they have a constituency. Amongst other things I heard on this show, which by the way is networked all across the United States, was the suggestion that any suggestion of Russian interference in the 2016 election, which of course is well documented and is well documented by the United States government itself, these talk show hosts were saying was a conspiracy. So, these information wars playing out on the ground here in the United States. But there are other stations, of course. There's NPR, which is, I suppose, the closest thing that the United States has to the BBC. There's C-SPAN as well, which is a network dedicated to broadcasting the proceedings in Congress, both from the House of Representatives especially, but also the Senate. And C-SPAN also has more middle-of-the-road political programming. So it's sometimes accused of leaning to the centre right, as it were, but certainly nothing as extreme as your traditional conservative talk show host. But these are live issues, these are live questions that are being posed around DC. And it's so interesting as well, Peter, being here. I mean, you're conscious in DC that you are in a capital, you're in an imperial capital.
Yeah.
And we sometimes kind of shy away from describing America in those terms or thinking of the United States in those terms. But we were an empire in the UK, and we handed the baton on to the United States, for better or worse. That is the reality of the situation. But it feels like an imperial capital.
I first went there in 1979, 80. In fact, rather tragically, I was greeted by a friend of my brother, Howard Liebengood, who was a Republican, who actually helped indict Nixon and shown around the Capitol. His son, Howie Liebengood, was a Capitol police officer, sergeant, and he committed suicide after the 2021 insurrection. So, it was then a very vulnerable imperial capital. But I had the same feeling in 1980 as you say now. It's very different from London. The closest I could find was it felt like Moscow. Red Square, the sense of grandeur, the sense that this was a center of power that projects all over the world. And I suppose that's what's at stake in this election, Adrian, is that whatever you say about Trump, very like the 1930s and that rally in Madison Square Gardens, America first, same phrase, is that Americans just look after America and stop fixing other people's problems, being the world policeman, helping Ukraine. And there's that sort of nativism, that isolationism, which has crept back, maybe for understandable reasons, given what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, these wars that cost America a lot of men and materiel and personnel. But one thing I just want to ask you, if you're getting a sense of this, you mentioned the centre-right C-SPAN. 50 million Americans have already voted in early voting, whether in person or in ballots. And there's very interesting analyses of different turnouts there. Because in 2020, during COVID, Trump rather so foolishly said, don't do early voting. And because, I don't know, just wanted to get people ill or something. So the Democrats had a lot of early voting, and that's helped them kind of get that final majority. Now he's told, especially in places like Nevada, GOP supporters to vote early. So you are seeing an upturn in Republican registered voters. But there's three things going on, which I wonder if you've any sense of. One is that there are unregistered, they're not registered any party voters, and we don't know which way they're breaking. They're very important if they break 50-50 or break one way or another. The other thing is there are apparently a lot of new registrations for younger people and women. Is that women who like Trump? Is that women who are activated by Taylor Swift and the issue of abortion and reproductive rights? And the other element I'm hearing about, again, this is just social media rumors, is that there are actually quite a lot of disaffected registered Republicans. They're called Haley voters, this woman who ran for quite a long time against Trump during the primary season. And anecdotal evidence, but I was on one Twitter thread. Can we trust Twitter? I don't know. I can't trust Elon Musk. And there were a lot of people saying, yeah, I usually vote Republican. I'm not this time. So, though Trump won the nomination, it wasn't completely without dissent. And we have senior figures like Liz Cheney and her father saying they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. Senior, Dick Cheney was Bush's second commander. Him and Rumsfeld and Cheney and George Bush could have led a government for 8 years. They're now saying they will not vote for Trump. Have you got any insight into this, Adrian, or am I making this up?
I don't have insight into that, but a couple of observations I would make. Here in Washington, in DC, on Saturday, there's going to be a massive rally, a massive women's rally. I'm going to be here covering that for Byline. And it is clear, and I mentioned this in the introduction, that Kamala Harris is going to foreground women's reproductive rights as a key plank of her campaign. There is a clear difference in terms of her approach compared to that of Donald Trump. Abortion rights are actually on the ballot paper in 10 states in this election. Now, Kamala Harris has a difficulty, by the way, given, you'll know this, Peter, that Roe v. Wade was a Supreme Court judgment that effectively legalized abortion in the United States. So it wasn't primary legislation that went through the Capitol building. It didn't, get passed in the Senate and the House of Representatives. It was a legal precedent, which, of course, because Trump then packed the Supreme Court with his supporters, they were able to roll back the right to abortion, or at least give different states the opportunity to roll back. So there's going to be a massive rally here in DC on Saturday. So in the run up to the election, the main election day, as you say, there is some early voting. In the run up to the main election day, that is going to be, I think, a key signal from Kamala Harris and her team to encourage particularly female voters, though it's not only female voters who are exercised by this, but particularly to female voters to get out and vote for the right to control what happens with their own bodies. So I think that's going to be a big moment. And I think they're seeing that as a chance to perhaps turn the tide going into those final days just
It's
before the election.
Yes, it's interesting. The way they framed it is freedom, which is usually, associated with states' rights, the Republican right, freedom, and it's a lot about the presidency is a lot about embodiment, symbolism. So having a woman, female president, having a woman talk about her freedoms, the freedom of women being restricted by individual states who now, thanks to the Dobbs Act, can do what they like over reproductive rights. It's quite a different framing, isn't it, from normal? It gives the Democrats a kind of very vivid platform to say, we're about getting government off your back. You know what I mean? Which,
Well,
which is,
indeed, isn't it astonishing, Peter? Here I am. I'm sitting looking up at the wonders of the Capitol building in this freedom-loving country. A country that, for all its faults and its flaws, which, like, of course, any country it has, a country that stands as a beacon of freedom around the world. That's the symbolic status of the United States, even if it doesn't always practice what it preaches. But symbolically, the United States is all about freedom. And here we are in 2024 talking about whether women have the right to control what goes on with their own bodies. That's a sign, I think, of how far things have already been pushed back following Trump's first presidency, which began in 2016. Just to counter as well, by the way, you talked about senior Republicans turning on Trump, and some of them have used words like fascist. I mean, there's no getting away from that in terms of a discussion about Trump. They often throw the word commie to Kamala Harris, but I think Kamala Harris would only be viewed as a communist through a very particular prism. I don't think anybody who's familiar with Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc would seriously consider Kamala Harris to be a communist. But whether Trump's a fascist or an authoritarian, we may yet live to find out. But that certainly seems to have more weight. But listen, the point is that the counter to these Republicans who say vote for Harris, who've turned their back on Trump, are the Arab Americans in swing states like Michigan who may well be turning their backs on the Democrats because of Joe Biden's support for what many people regard as Netanyahu's genocide in Gaza. And I think that is going to be a real issue. I've got a family member actually who, as it happens, goes out with an Arab American in Michigan. And it's not necessarily those Arab Americans will vote for Trump, but that they won't be able to bring themselves to turn out to vote for Biden. And in swing states, given the way that the electoral college works in the United States, that could be absolutely critical. And that could potentially cost Kamala Harris the election.
yes, it's very reminiscent of the UK general election. Remember all these, well, there 9, 10 seats Labour lost to independents over this same issue of Labour's stance on Gaza and what was happening there at that time now obviously involves Lebanon. Obviously, Britain's slightly more remote from any decision making or arms supplies, though it does supply arms and material assistance to Israel. So I think you're right. What must be said, and I've seen the ads, thanks to Elon Musk, they target, so the Trump campaign will specifically target Muslim Americans with Kamala, encourages the genocide. But they will also target Jewish heritage Americans, say Kamala is a Muslim or Kamala is pro-Muslim, she supports Hamas. It's a very difficult wedge issue. What did emerge, just as it emerged that Trump had been in prolonged conversations over the last 2 years with Vladimir Putin, that it is alleged, and I've seen no rebuttal of it, he's been in conversation with Netanyahu, getting him not to go along with Biden's ceasefire in order to disrupt the election. So a lot of games, it's very, very tragic that, the Palestinians are caught in the middle of these kind of bigger geopolitical games. But I just wanted to go back to what you said about women, Adrian, because the polling is very close. But American polling isn't as rigorous as it is here. And if you look at some of the polls, they'll say, we approached 40,000 people, right, to do a telephone poll and got a sample of 600. So there's a lot of adjustment being done about how they got it wrong on past polls, who's a likely voter, and how they voted in the last election. In 2020, the polls overestimated Biden's support and underestimated Trump's. Biden still won. So they've countered that. But after the Dobbs Act in 2022, the midterms, they underestimated the Dem support. So there may be a lot of things going on under the surface, which makes this very unpredictable. Makes it all the more important what happens on Tuesday. And I say to you, Adrian, that, I think the whole world is on tenterhooks. I know my colleagues in Ukraine are completely on tenterhooks. This will change the world, this election. And for all its rights and wrongs, and all the gerrymandering and the disinformation, and the insurrection, this is a festival of democracy, which unfortunately occasionally turns into a riot sometimes. But it is, we hope, in the hands of the people. We're talking about a crazy system where 70,000 votes in the swing states could change the course of history. But we are talking about one person, one vote ultimately. And as you said, American exceptionalism, I don't believe in it. America does exceptionally bad things, but it's a kind of inverted American exceptionalism. So it always does bad things. It does many good things to the world. It has many liberties, and the rule of law is one of its glories, a lot of its culture. And it matters. It still is the world's superpower. How much longer, we don't know. So what matters is what you're hearing on the radio, you talking to people, and what those people vote.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about voting intentions in a moment, Peter, because I've got a little bit of insight onto that. But just to say, by the way, it's lovely to have so many people listening along. I always like to say hello to a few people who are listening. So hello to Annette, hello to Faye, hello to Barbara, hello to Kevin, hello to Harvey, hello to Joanna, hello to Cheryl, hello to Peter, hello to Gus, hello to Vicky, hello to Glenn, hello to Paul, hello to Thomas, hello to Susan, hello to Adrian, hello to Claire. If any of you want to join in, by the way, that wasn't a comprehensive list. That's just some of you listening. If you do want to join in and ask us a question, as I say, Peter and I may not be able to answer that question here and now, but if you're listening on your phone app, there's a little microphone in the bottom left-hand corner. Peter and I, by the way, will be happily shooting the cut for as long as we can do. But if you want to join in and ask us a question, we're more than happy to take a question and engage with you as well, if you would like to do that. So just tap the little microphone icon in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Just to say, as we're chatting, Peter, as well, by the way, on this beautiful, glorious day. I mean, people are wearing T-shirts here in November. It's incredible. The school party has gone out the US Capitol Visitor Centre here, which is just over the road from the Capitol building itself. And children are travelling from all over the United States, and I've seen visitors here from other parts of the world, precisely because the Capitol building and the White House, which is about a mile away down the National Mall, because they do embody these ideas of freedom and liberty. And anybody who's clear-eyed, as I say, would not pretend that America has always lived up to those highest ideals any more than any other country has lived up to its own ideals. But the United States does stand as that beacon for freedom, for liberty, for democracy. And this is such a momentous election because at least one of the candidates, it is feared, may not fully respect all of those values. I saw one bit of research, Peter, which suggests that younger voters in particular are reluctant to tell the truth to pollsters. So it skews with age. Older voters will generally declare their intentions honestly to pollsters. But I've just caught this little bit of research suggesting that younger voters, whether because they're more suspicious of social media, having grown up in a social media age, but when they are polled, as many as 1 in 4 young people don't tell the truth. And that's always an issue, isn't it, with polls? Because we know, for example, in the UK, that sometimes voters, at a time when the Conservative Party's reputation was pretty low, that they would be unwilling to say, I'm going to vote Tory. And yet, many people did. I'm not talking about the most recent election, but, for example, when Boris Johnson was elected. So people aren't always honest about their voting intentions. You may be aware, Pete, as well, that there are betting markets in the United States. That isn't an aircraft you can hear, by the way. It's a police motorbike just going by. I hope I'm not going to get moved on. I don't think I will. Had a good chat with the police officer over the road. But we're talking about we're talking about voting intentions, weren't we? And people not always telling the truth about voting intentions, and particularly young people.
Yes, this is the classic. Happened, I think, especially in that's the surprise John Major victory of 1992. It's called the Shy Tories. And I've seen some American pollsters speculate there is a shy Trump supporter. I've never noticed Trump supporters being particularly shy. I must say that. But what were you saying on these poly markets? Yes.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
so the
the
United
betting
States,
markets.
yeah,
Yeah.
the United States now has these markets which allow people effectively to bet, but bet in cryptocurrency, bet in Bitcoin and their equivalents. Now, the gambling markets have traditionally been the best indicator of who is going to get elected. And there's been a lot of money going into these betting markets in recent times for Trump. Now, of course, if lots of money is going in for Trump, does that mean that Trump is going to win? Or does it simply mean that the people who support Trump are backing him to the hilt, but also trying to move the sense amongst people reading about this that it's going Trump's way? It's very difficult, obviously, to work that out. But
I
there is
mean,
a whole world there of gambling using cryptocurrency and money. The betting in those markets suggests that Trump will win.
it'd be very interesting. It's very unregulated compared to our betting markets. And as a keen sports follower and footy fan, I don't know if the betting markets are also that reliable, but certainly the one you're talking about, Poly Market, which I think Elon Musk is always talking about. Let's be clear, Elon Musk has declared he'll get a job if Trump gets in. He's currently indicted for election interference in Pennsylvania, asked to turn up to court offering $1 million to people to register for things. So he's not a reliable source. And the poly market is apparently, according to Mark Cuban, who actually invested in it, who's a more Democrat supporting billionaire, is only foreigners can vote on it. With crypto swirling around, we know that Musk himself is a huge fan of crypto. He thinks it should replace the dollar. Dave Troy, the great journalist, has written for Byline Times a lot about this, along with Peter Thiel, David Sachs, all three tech gurus from South Africa originally, oddly enough. The world of crypto is a kind of competing fiat to fiat currencies. And I'm not sure we should trust that. And Adrian, look, betting markets get it wrong, don't they?
Well, they do, and pollsters get it wrong as well. I mean, Trump's success in 2016, for example, was not seen by the pollsters, and I think there can be as well an attention on the polls at the expense of the policies. We've talked on Byline a fair bit about whether Trump is an authoritarian, whether he's a fascist. There's a really good podcast out now, which I've done with Heidi Sigmund Kuda about that, whether the word fascist really does apply to Donald Trump. And people like Heidi, Jason Stanley, US academic, are in no doubt. You look at this checklist of fascism and Trump, you're playing fascist bingo, you're crying house when you've got Donald Trump involved, because he does tick so many of the boxes. But this other thing, which is barely talked about in the UK, and this always puzzles me, Peter, about why British Brexiters felt that Donald Trump would be an ally. Now, they might share a kind of nativist philosophy, a belief that what they might regard as the true-born people of their country, which is the case of both the United Kingdom and the United States, is clearly a very, it's a ridiculous concept, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Nativist politicians. Why would British nativists support Donald Trump? Well, they share a view of nativism, but make America great again. America first. Excuse me? In what sense does that benefit the United Kingdom? There was no chance of this great big trade deal with the United States that was promised. I know Trump was out of the picture by the time Brexit had happened. Why would a man whose motto is America first cut a special deal with Britain? What's in it for him? Always with Trump, you've got to ask, what's in it for him? What was in it for him? Absolutely nothing. And he's now talking about 20% imports into the United States, more, it should be said, for imports from China. What impact is that going to have on UK export? You know, we are an exporting nation. We rely on having access to foreign markets, but this is blatant protectionism. Obviously, that wouldn't just affect the UK, that would have a massive impact, and I think an unquantifiable impact at the moment, because we don't know what retaliation might then follow from the EU, from China. What impact would that have on world trade? Could that trigger a new depression? I don't know, but it's something we've got to consider if the world's most powerful nation is saying we're going to impose 20% tariffs. Take back energy within the United States, by the way. They're trying to get energy companies to be based only in the US. I don't know how you move your oil wells from Saudi Arabia to the United States, but this is really quite radical, revolutionary, disruptor stuff, isn't it? It is the stuff of Elon Musk. It is the stuff of Peter Thiel. But from
You,
someone who wants to be in the White House.
what you've sort of lighted upon, I think, is two crucial things. It's not the economy, stupid for Trump, it's his personal economy. He was once patently a Democrat. He follows the money. And I think when you're looking at the key figure who straddles this, Brexit and Trump, is obviously Steve Bannon. His campaign manager just recently released from prison. He was incarcerated for contempt of Congress. He is Nigel Farage's best pal. There are lots of financial connections including on Byline Times, a go-between for Nigel Farage in the US, this woman called Preet. She had to declare on the FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act, that did that late. Farage turned up in Washington, didn't get to see Trump this summer in order to give him support. So there is a global anti-globalist movement. There's an elite that hates the current elites who look at, and he said it, Bannon's called it international nationalism. And to be fair, the 1930s analogy, which is there not only in the Madison Square Rally, not only in the protectionism which killed the economies in the 1930s, it's there in this sort of idea, an alliance between nationalist states. So what's happened, I think, really interestingly is, and this is across Europe as well as the UK and the US, is the centre right who believed in free markets, who believed in international globalism, the sort of sense that outsourcing. They, I say, since 2008, have lost the credibility after the crash, and slowly the old centre right, is being hollowed out and being gobbled out by a new nationalist populist right, which does believe in heavy state intervention for their preferred people. So, if you're the right colour or the right religion or you vote the right way, the government will come to your aid. So I think this is a global phenomenon where that system of free market collapsed after 2008.
I think that's a really important insight, Peter. I mean, the thing you're describing in UK terms, the closest equivalent to that is Johnsonism, wasn't it? I mean, Johnson was such a strange conservative because he acknowledged the way in which communities in the Midlands and the north of England and in Scotland and Wales had been left behind. There was the whole levelling up agenda. Sadly, it came to virtually nothing. But the insight that there were these communities who were not being catered to, who had been, in some senses, victims of globalisation, was, I think, central to Boris Johnson's appeal.
But
And he was not traditional conservative in that sense.
but you have to ask yourself then why, like Trump, what was in it for him?
Mm.
I think. Because Johnson's politics from a Liberal mayor of London float all around. And I'd say, they follow the path of least resistance and most remuneration. It's very interesting, and this will be crucial to the future of the Conservative Party, that of the two final candidates that will be announced on Saturday, who's the new leader of the Conservative Party. Kemi Badenoch has backed off endorsing Trump, but she hasn't endorsed Kamala. Robert Jenrick has said he'd vote for Trump. Boris Johnson said he'd vote for Trump. Liz Truss, another prime minister, said she'd vote for Trump. Not that she gets a vote, neither of them get a vote. And there's a Bannon connection, obviously, with Johnson. Steve Bannon was Johnson's advisor, so he claimed, leading up to being prime minister. Liz Truss turned up to do a program during the CPAC Conservative Action conference they have to appear on TV with Steve Bannon, felon Steve Bannon, who praised Tommy Robinson in front of her. So there is a transatlantic connection of money and this new nationalist conservatism. And I fear, Adrian, well, we can see, even if Trump loses, which, we don't know, there's a chance he could well lose, that conduit of money, transatlantic conduit of money and national politics will still remain.
Yeah, well, I think after Trump lost to Biden, I think there was a sense amongst many progressive people, wasn't there, that the snake had been chopped off at the head, and that was the end of that. And it clearly wasn't the end of that, not least because Trump himself is so egotistical and arrogant, and he wants another go. But also, crucially, and I think this is part of the story that Byline tells, is that structurally, these forces have not gone away, have they? Because if it wasn't Trump, if it wasn't JD Vance promoting these ideas, it would be somebody else. That the money, the sometimes dark money that drives these agendas is present. It's present in the water. It's present in our politics, both in the United States and in the UK, and arguably in parts of the EU as well, and it is there. You mentioned something, Peter, just to move the conversation on as well, about what will happen to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine, more than any other nation, I suspect, will be on tenterhooks for the outcome of this election, because Trump, of course, notoriously close to Putin, a man who said that he could get this conflict settled, but at what cost? Will that simply be in removing US support and effectively pressuring Ukraine into ceding large parts of its territory to Putin and rewarding Putin's aggression? That's got to be the fear.
And it's just back briefly to this important thing about, the money, the forces behind them. I truly believe this is a result of the growing inequality. There's actually quite a lot of inequality in Europe, but particularly in the US and the UK, where you have more and more billionaires. And if you're a billionaire, you do feel a bit peeved. You've made all this money, you have all these people kowtowing to you, like Rupert Murdoch or Elon Musk. Why does an ordinary Joe in the street get the same number of votes as you do? And now you can see this very clearly with Elon Musk, that he's trying to buy this election, pouring money into his PACs, twisting, and I've documented this, is one of the major social media platforms in the world, probably the primary one for news, Twitter, changing the algorithms, making sure that it's like an attack surface. And I wrote about this on last Friday when it emerged that Musk himself was in regular conversation with Putin. He's stopped them using Ukraine using the Starlink terminals to target the Russian Navy in Crimea. And since then, it's been revealed he has the Starlink terminals are fitted to Russian drones. We have the way he's twisted the platform, the way he talks about Ukraine. And there's no doubt, there can be very, very little doubt if you're a Ukrainian or a great journalist we have out there. Trump, what Musk has said is Trump, Putin's right. What the Republicans did to delay material support for Ukraine over the summer, which led to reverses on the front line, would mean if Trump was in power, he'd repay that debt to Putin and to Musk. Both of you are pushing this agenda that Ukraine should surrender the territories it has. And obviously, the signal to Putin is keep fighting because the tide will turn, because America will come to our aid in some way. It's utterly terrifying for Ukrainians who, when they have been occupied by Russia, we've seen what's happened to Ukrainians. Killed, dumped in mass graves in Izium, in Bucha, and God knows what's happened to the 400,000 people who used to live in Mariupol. Some escaped. We just don't know. So, The stakes of this couldn't be higher. It is absolutely crass that the biggest land war in Europe, the hostile state involved in this unwanted, unwarranted, unprovoked invasion, is being backed by a potential president of the United States.
I mentioned Israel earlier as well. Of course, Donald Trump is profoundly pro-Israel. He was the one world leader that recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, which, of course, I mean, it's a symbolic gesture that it doesn't affect anything directly on the ground, but the symbolism of the Middle East, of a world leader recognized Jerusalem, which, of course, is claimed by both by Muslims and Christians as part of their heritage in the Middle East, was profoundly inflammatory. And there is that question, isn't there, for those Arab Americans who can't bring themselves to vote for Harris because of the Democrat support for Netanyahu. That's obviously their democratic choice. What do they think Trump is going to do to Netanyahu? Is he going to be any more of a restraining force? Is he going to be phoning him up and saying, you know what, you've gone far enough now with Iran and with Lebanon, it's time to sue for peace? Can we honestly expect to see Donald Trump doing that? There's no evidence in anything Trump has ever said or done that suggests that that is likely.
It's very confusing, especially for some of my Ukrainian friends who are daily being targeted by Iranian drones. And Iran has provided a lot of support to Russia in its sort of attack on Ukraine. To not go, well, I'm on the side of Netanyahu when he takes on Hezbollah and Hamas. We also started by Iran. And this is where I think we've got to look beyond the normal allegiances. There are many ties between Netanyahu, Israel, and Putin, as well as the US. And so it should be clear cut, shouldn't it? So, well, Iran's on Hezbollah, Hamas side, it's on Russia's side. If you're Ukrainian, you should support your enemy's enemy, i.e. Netanyahu. But there's a money game going on here and a complicated game with other Middle East countries like Saudi Arabia as well, and the rival between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which doesn't make it clear cut that Netanyahu isn't also useful to Putin as well. So, I mean, we live in dark times. There's no doubt that Trump wanted to undermine the ceasefire, but Biden was pushing for a ceasefire. He thinks that Netanyahu is out of control. That's been documented. They feel that Israel's going rogue. Meanwhile, Trump is inciting them to go rogue. And to me, my personal opinion, this is an echo of what happened in 1979 when Carter was up for a second term against Reagan. And the allegation is the Republicans, there was this raid in Tehran on the US embassy. There were dozens of hostages. And the allegation is fairly well proved, whether Reagan knew about it or not, that the Republicans deliberately scuppered a rescue for those hostages because that would help Carter. So we have certainly just look at the dark game some politician plays. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's highly plausible that a lot of games are being played around this crucial election. Is affecting what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon. It's definitely affecting what's happening in Ukraine.
Let's welcome Callie into the conversation. Hi, Callie.
Oh, hi. I've been enjoying the conversation. I've been getting ready for work, so I was actually listening anonymously. And I just want to say, I heard something that was sort of I think just like a slight misspoke, and I don't remember which one of you said it because I was getting ready for work. But you were talking about Muslims voting, and you said in the end something like you mentioned like they might vote for Biden. You meant to say Harris, but you said Biden.
Sure.
And I just wanted to point that out. And I also wanted to say my mother is a Palestinian activist times 15 years. She's been driving me crazy with, I'm not going to vote, and da, 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 all that kind of stuff. And I found out 2 days ago she did vote for Kamala in the end.
Dude.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, you were talking about crypto, and you mentioned Dave Troy, and I didn't want people to get the impression that he's pro crypto. If you look at my pinned tweet, I have several of his great posts about Musk and crypto and, his opinion about different things. So I just wanted to come up and say those two things. I enjoy this space. I'll follow you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Callie.
That,
Lovely to speak to you. Where exactly are you calling us from, by the way, Callie?
Santa Cruz, California.
can I just say, yeah, that's very heartening to hear about, say, your mother. We have to remember, and memories are short, which president created a Muslim countries ban for anybody coming for certain Muslim countries. He called it a Muslim ban. Anybody of a Muslim background in particularly a place like Michigan should, look at the actual track records. Obviously, what's US support for what's happened with this IVF is appalling, but where's the best hope? On the crypto thing, just very, very briefly, yeah, no, Dave Troy, he writes for us. He's very against this plan to replace the dollar with crypto. He thinks it could lead to sort of the end of the world. So thank you for help clarify those two things.
Tom Scott is joining us as well. Hello, Tom. Just tap your speaker on and join in. How are you doing?
Hi there. Good, thanks. Yes, I'm in Cornwall in the UK.
Great to have you on.
It's kind of obvious to me that whatever happens on the 5th, Trump is not going to accept that he's lost if he does lose. And I just wondered if you've got any sense of how well prepared the administration is for the kind of civil violence that's likely to happen in
Tom,
that event.
Tom, I just want to thank Tom for his great work. He writes regularly for Byline, has great insight, as knowledgeable as I am about these far right networks. Adrian's on the ground. He maybe give a better sense of this, but we must remember the difference between 2020 to 21 when Trump refused to accept the result. Now, many things are very similar. It's a close vote. You can see already burning of ballot boxes. Trump's already saying they're stealing it, early registration. He's playing the same game. So it's heads he wins, tails he wins. Like if he loses, he'll say it's stolen. But all I'd suggest, and Adrian might have more detail on this, is that in 2020, he was the incumbent. He had 3 months of transition. He had all that time to plan for, with Roger Stone, there's a great documentary on this, Stop the Steal, to lead the insurrection in overt or covert ways. Having that happen once, I cannot believe that the authorities in the US, at the Capitol building, National Guard, FBI, local police agencies are not much better prepared. And I suspect that a lot of the indictments or information that was coming from the FBI about Russian influences we got a month and a half ago about Tenet, they said had much more on that. They've held that back for this moment. But I don't know. And the danger is that it's, that it's state capitals which are targeted, not their capital.
Two things on that, Peter and Tom. One is that I think a bit like the Conservatives in the UK who made a whole thing about having to bring certain documents along to vote, which we know disenfranchised, often underprivileged voters. The whole thing about having to bring certain forms of ID, whereby your pensioner bus pass was legitimate ID, but your student ID card wasn't, for example. The Republicans are already playing that game. So in Virginia, I think 1,600 people have been knocked off the voting list over allegations that they're not qualified to vote. But at the same breath, we're being told that of those 1,600, many are in fact eligible to vote. But there's questions about their documentation and their registration. And those people then will have to now go back and re-register and vote. So this sense that there is this widespread voting fraud going on is once again being promulgated by the Republicans. Any objective voice I've heard says that, yes, there may be some degree of personation, there may be some degree of people attempting voting fraud, but in the big picture, this is just, it's a tiny, tiny minority. So I think the ground is already being laid for something similar to last time. I should say, in terms of the physical fabric around here, I mean, compared to when I first came to the White House, which was about 25 years ago, it's much, I mean, you could never get that close to the White House, but there's now an additional layer, a road that you can't cross where you used to be able to go up to the fence and take photographs at the White House. The White House itself is extremely well protected. The Capitol now has a level of fortification around it. And I mean, you can still get close enough to take a good picture, as I have done, and you can come around the back way of the Capitol and walk up the steps and so on. But it's not easy to get into the building. But there's a level of fortification as you come up the National Mall now, which indicates that security is being taken very seriously. As it happened earlier today, I was chatting to a German politician who is here, and she and her team were just larking around, posing for photographs, and one of them sat on the wall, the outer wall of the Capitol, so still probably at 150 yards from the building itself. Very quickly, a police officer rode up and shouted at them aggressively to get down. And they were just larking about, so it was clearly no bad intention on their part. But I think there is a sense here that security needs to be high, that people do need to be on their guard to make sure that there isn't a repeat of January the 6th. I think that there is evidence here of that, albeit that, I mean, here I am sitting outside the US Capitol Visitor Centre within 100 yards of the Capitol, broadcasting around the world, and everybody's being very friendly. So at the moment, it feels that there is a sensible balance being struck, but the events of January the 6th were unprecedented, weren't they? I mean, absolutely unprecedented. And as you say, Peter, you don't know where the people who have that kind of mindset, where they're going to strike next. It may be at a more regional and a state level than the US Capitol again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a rocky 3 months, isn't it? Heads, Trump wins. Head, Kamala loses. If he doesn't win, and it's a small margin, which it will be because of the way the electoral college works. Both Hillary and Biden won the popular vote by several million, but it's all down to Michigan and Pennsylvania and North Carolina and all these swing states that he can argue the toss. How long did it take? It took about 10 days for us to knew Biden would win in 2020. So it's going to be a rocky ride. The only hope, I suppose, well, there's one dark hope. The polls are so out that it's clear that if Trump wins, he's not going to start staying at Stone, is it? It's interesting. There's only fraud if he loses. There's no fraud if he wins.
Who can forget George W. Bush's hanging chads?
Well,
Do you remember
it
that?
all begins. You know who was working on that? Who argued it was that I forget the exact county, those uncounted votes in Florida in 2000. Who organised all the protests to stop them being counted? And had they been counted, Gore would have been president. Roger Stone. Roger Stone was behind all that, and so we have now 24 years of this questioning the vote, undermining the vote, this voter suppression, and it's very damaging, I think, in the long run, because if democracy fails, if people lose trust in institutions like the ballot, like the police, like the media, then what happens? They crave a strong person. It's nearly always a strong man. You know what I mean? And I think this is what's happening. And this is a battle of our lives. And if Trump loses, we'll be fighting it for the next few decades anyway.
Peter, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you also to Callie and to Tom. We're going to end it there. And with thanks as well to Harvey White, who is going to turn this into an episode of the Byline podcast. So thank you in advance to Harvey for that. And we'll be doing regular updates here from DC, both here on Byline Radio. So make sure you follow us and spread the word to your friends, and also on the Byline podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much indeed for joining in, or just for listening in. We'll see you again very soon. Cheers, Peter. Thank you. Bye now. Bye-bye.